Welcome to the Millionaire Race podcast, where we are empowering you to better your financial standing in order to maximize your potential and collectively solve many of the socio-economic problems that face the African American demographic today. My name is Toxia Gunyemi, and I'm happy to have you on the show with us. Make sure you subscribe to the show so that you can be alerted every time a new podcast becomes available. Also, feel free to email us at toxy@themillrace.com. That's Toxy, Toksy, at themillrace, THEMILRACE.com. We'd be happy to take your suggestions, any comments that you may have. And of course, if you'd like to be a guest on the show, please send us an email there as well. This is episode 9 in the series, and it's going to be a good one. As I mentioned in one of the previous episodes, make sure you listen to episode 1 first. Episode 1 has the foundation of all the other episodes where we lay out the reason for the series in the first place and a lot of the statistics that guide us along the way. Now, of course, as we move along in different episodes, we'll be sharing more statistics, but always good for you to start with episode 1, and then you can listen to all the others in any order that you wish from that point on. African Americans, although making up 12% of the U.S. population, control just about 2% of the wealth of this nation. That means there's very little money flowing around in the community, which of course leads to a host of socio-economic problems. The African American demographic is the one with the lowest home ownership rates. It's the one with the highest incarceration. It's the one with the highest rate of homelessness, the least educated demographic. It's the demographic with the fewest business owners, and a host of others. There are many reasons why this is the case, and there are many brave and awesome people who, over the years, have been fighting for a change in these statistics, trying to make things better for the demographic as a whole. We applaud everything they have done and they are doing. But we also, in our own way, must help. We have available to us now many more things that were not available to our brothers and sisters in the past, especially when it comes to finances. And we must take advantage of these things. That is the whole reason for this podcast. It's to share information, to share knowledge. We have awesome guests that are coming onto the show, telling us how they have been able to navigate the system, what they did in order to break free from any obstacles that were put in front of them and do well for themselves and ultimately for the community as a whole. These are not necessarily people who have made hundreds of millions of dollars, but they have run and surpassed the goal that we have for this podcast, which is a net worth of $1 million. It is my firm belief that each and every one of us, with the tools available to us in this nation at this time, can attain a net worth of $1 million or more in our lifetime. If we do the right things, if we understand the system, if we follow the process the right way. Yes, some will say that was done before and it was shut down. That was a different time. We can do this now. And the more of us that run and attain that $1 million net worth and more will be able to ensure that the mistakes of the past do not happen again. If you've listened to the previous podcast, we started by saying the first thing is you have to know what your net worth is, and you need to know how to calculate your net worth, which is very simple. You take what you own and subtract what you owe, and what's left over is your net worth. That's the starting point, knowing what your net worth is. And now as we're starting a new year, it's a really good time to know what your net worth is so that you have a goal to see that increase by the end of the year. If your net worth is $50,000 now, hopefully by the end of the year, it will be $100,000 or more. If your net worth is $100,000, hopefully it will be $150,000, $200,000, $250,000. Everyone is unique and everyone is accountable for their own numbers, but you want to see that number going higher. Again, as we're starting this new year, you want to make sure, after knowing your net worth, that you have a budget. It could be as simple or as complicated as you want it to be. That's totally up to you. But you have to have an idea of how much money you need for this new year. I have a simple spreadsheet that breaks it out into 12 months. And I write on that spreadsheet the basic things that I know that I'll be paying for: mortgage, school fees for the kids, groceries for the home, insurance. It's all broken down. So I know the basics of definitely what I will need for this year. Based on that, I can tell what I need to do to make sure I can cover all those bills. Plus, of course, a little extra things that I'm not aware of. So you need to have something like that. For some people, it's a real complicated spreadsheet. Mine is really simple. One of these days, maybe I'll post it on the website so that you can copy it, but it is very simple. Having a budget, letting you know how much you need, gives you an idea of whether or not your current position, your current employment, your current sources of income are enough to cover what your needs are. Because if they don't, guess what? You're going to have to borrow money in order to meet the shortfall, which will put you into more debt, which will reduce your net worth even more. If your income doesn't cover the monies that you need to get paid more, right? Or you need to reduce some certain items on your budget. Those are the two ways to cover your needs: either reduce your expenses or increase your income. And to increase your income, you need to make your time more valuable. Learn something in addition to what you know right now. It could be in the same field. It could be in a different field. Make your time more valuable. Make sure that now at the beginning of the year, what you're earning now is not the same as what you're earning at the end of the year, because you'd have learned more, you'd have grown more. So by the end of this year, you should be earning more per hour, however you calculate your income, than you are right now. That should be your goal. But you have to be intentional to make these things happen. And of course, you can make this happen. People are doing this every day. The people who are coming onto this podcast are doing this all the time. That's why they're coming onto the show, because unfortunately, most of us have lacked that passing down of knowledge from parents to children to grandchildren and so on and so forth, to teach us these things so that they are ingrained in our system. For family talk, I want to talk about filing our taxes. Tax time is really important because, like it or not, we all have to pay our taxes. I know lots of people don't like hearing that, but I always use the analogy of a movie that I really liked called Captain Phillips. You may have seen that. In that movie, Captain Phillips was the captain of the ship that was hijacked. And at the end of the movie, he was rescued by the U.S. military. When you see the U.S. Navy ships come to grab him, the first thing that came to mind for me when I watched it was, wow, thank God for the taxes that we pay that enabled these two humongous warships come to rescue just one man. Imagine if that were you in his place. You would be really happy that the rest of us paid our taxes so that you could be rescued that way, right? That's just me in the way that I like to look at these things. But generally, taxes are to help all of us. And I know the politicians misuse and mishandle our monies. You change that by voting. That's how you change how your money is spent in Washington, by how you vote. But our responsibility is to pay our taxes, and the correct taxes, that is. It is our civic responsibility to pay our taxes. And of course, to take all the exemptions and expenses that are allowed, by the government, for sure. Yes. But let's make sure our taxes are filed correctly and on time. That's another notch in our running the Millionaire Race. Now, we have another special guest with us today. We have an interview with Daniel, and when we come back from the break, we'll jump right into it. Daniel with us on the show today. Welcome, Daniel.
Thanks for having me, Tasky.
Absolutely. Daniel, can you share just a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Again, name's Daniel. I grew up in St. Petersburg, Florida, south side of St. Petersburg, which is a predominantly black part of the city. I matriculated through public school systems there. My dad was a basketball coach, 30 years, coaching one of the best teams in that city. Was a legend there, played basketball himself. And my mother was always say is a, great nurturer, also worked. Only made minimum wage up until she was about 50 and received her degree at around 55. Went to the University of Florida, go Gators, and received a degree in chemistry. Left there and got a job in the medical device field. Currently today, I'm Vice President of Quality Assurance and Regulatory Affairs for Fortune 500 medical device company.
That's wonderful. We're glad to have you with us. You've already given us quite a few things that we would like to learn about. But I always like to ask our guests, how was your life growing up? You talked about you were brought up in St. Petersburg.
Absolutely. So, look, I think I grew up in what would be called a middle class family. Dad was a teacher, mom worked. Grew up with one brother. And, we grew up in the south side of St. Petersburg was, predominantly black, and the culture and the things that, we learned from that, we found pride in that. My parents went to all black schools growing up. The schools that they went to were segregated, right? And so they grew up in segregated schools where they didn't always have the most up-to-date books and all of that, but there was pride, right? And when you listen to them, right, they really don't bring those things up. They worked through those and became who they were with what they had. Now, that doesn't go to say that wasn't a problem. It just means that they never made excuses for it. And so, look, I grew up tons of pride, thought I was actually going to go to Florida A&M University. Another whole story there where I didn't make it there. But again, that concept of an African-American culture and living it. And look, we knew each other, right? We grew up to school. We walked to school together. For elementary school, I still have friends today from nursery school. My parents, they still have what they call a class of 68. They still meet up with their classmates. So it's a very tight-knit city, or at least that part of the city, which is the south side. My parents would tell me there was a time where you couldn't cross Central Avenue at a certain time because that was the white folks' time. Wow. Our side of town, and you had to know your social security number and all those type of things, right? So it's a very segregated city, but there's tons of pride, right, in South St. Petersburg. And we've got quite a few folks, famous people that have left that city. Angela Bassett and Will Packer, those names you can look up, but we've got some really, really known folks that have come out of the city of St. Petersburg, Florida.
Yeah, and now they have you too.
Well, I think I do okay, but I'm surely not famous.
You mentioned so from elementary you went to college. You went to high school, of course, graduated, and then went to college. It sounds like college was not an option. You were encouraged, to go. Absolutely.
So I've always had the idea that I wanted to go to college. My parents were, from an academic perspective, right? You couldn't bring home a C, right? My dad would say that only people that are average, right, get C's, and he didn't raise any average kids, right? So from that perspective, right, I always competed also, right? And so whether I played sports, and I competed at everything. Right. And I always thought that everybody was competing, whether it was sports or academics or whatever it was. So I always did the best I could and was a pretty good student. I went to Lakewood High School, and there was also what's called the Center for Advanced Technologies. And I was accepted to that program. And so really was the true thought of an athlete and a student. Right. And so I always knew that I wanted to experience college. I did all the right things I think that were necessary to give me an opportunity to go. And like I said, ended up at the University of Florida.
Great. And how did you decide on chemistry?
That's an interesting story. So, Look, still today, I don't know what I want to do in life. And so you go to the University of Florida, you take a number of courses, and at 60 credits, you have to choose a major. You have to, whatever it is. Yeah. And look, I'm up 60 credits. As a sophomore, I'm looking at my transcripts, and I start counting classes and realize I've got more chemistry classes than any other classes. And so I said, well, I guess I'll be a chemistry major. And so that's how I landed into chemistry. I always loved science and math, never really was too interested in arts and writing. I always felt like, look, you can't be judged on 2 + 2 is always equals 4, right? But when it's literature and arts, right, there's a bit of, people can say, yeah, I don't like that, and so I never wanted to be in a position where someone could subjectively tell me how well I'm doing, right? And so I could compete, right, with anyone, anywhere with science, because 2 + 2 is always 4, 3 + 3 is always 6, right? And so I could compete in that way and felt like that was the way I wanted to go. And that's how I ended up with the chemistry degree.
Okay. Were there any obstacles that you faced in college, being African American?
So sure, absolutely. So, well, it's interesting. It kind of alluded to earlier that I wanted to go to an HBCU, which was Florida A&M University. That was my plan all along. I had known that. And then the University of Florida came along and offered me a lot of money, scholarship money. And I tell kids all the time, you go where you can afford. Okay. You don't go where you just get accepted, right? And so once they offered the money, I decided to go to the University of Florida. It was interesting is at the time it was about 40,000 students, maybe 4 or 5% African American. Wow. Well, let's just call it what we would call Black / African American. And I'd always say that 4%, maybe 2% were true Africans. And then you had another 2%, right, that we would call African Americans today. Mm-hmm. And even maybe 1% of that might have been graduate students. And so when you start to think about the number of African Americans at the University of Florida that you could bond with, right, that you're culturally attached to, that number became very small. But it actually became a positive because we knew each other, right? We grew community, right? We were able to learn from one another and how to matriculate and manage through living on the University of Florida's campus. So that was extremely helpful. What wasn't helpful, though, is you have a legacy of folks, right, or white folks that have been there. And what you'll learn in certain tests, right, is, look, you need the notes. You need the old test, right? There are things or things that can help you pass classes that many, Caucasian white folks would have because they were in these fraternities that have been around for 50 years, and they've got file cabinets of this professor and all the tests, and they were able to leverage that, right, to improve their grades. Well, as an African American, we don't have access, and I'll probably say access more than once while we're talking. Mm-hmm. Well, we don't have access to that. So when you think about going to a class or a course, right, and we've got a test, and someone actually has the same test, right, from that professor might have given that test 2 or 3 years ago, or the exact similar questions, maybe he's changed up some numbers, right, and they have access to that information, right, and you don't. You can see where and that's called access, right? We're new, many of us first-time college students. We're not part of a white fraternity. I'm part of an African-American fraternity, Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. And so those are things that we had to deal with. Mm-hmm. Look, many of us just didn't have a lot. Yeah. Right. Look, that scholarship money, if you don't have it, you can't stay. Right. I remember I would walk to class, and the University of Florida is pretty big, right? So you can walk a half a mile, 2 miles to class, and I'm watching BMWs pass by, Mercedes-Benz passes by with people my age, right? Imagine going to school and not having to worry about finances. Yeah. So that's a burden, right? That became a burden on many of us where we had to, as a community, help each other. We feed each other, right? Look, I'll buy a pizza. Don't worry about it today. Those type of things that we had to use as a community to continue to grow. Look, University of Florida is also in the city of Gainesville. We had the N-word painted on our dorms before. And all those things happen, and we have to work through them, right? They're not going away, right? But I think the key is you don't let them to get in your way, right? And I think in today's world, those are really just obstacles, but they can be, you can get around those, right? There's nothing much that really should be able to stop you from whatever you have, your goals are.
I want to pick up on one, well, you mentioned a couple of things, but on the term scholarships, right?
Yes.
How did you get the scholarship? Did you apply for the scholarships yourself? Did someone help you?
So interesting. As you go through and you're doing all your applications for school, right? And I did apply. I applied to University of Florida. I applied to all the large schools in the state of Florida. And I got a call from a guy named Mr. Boatwright. And Mr. Boatwright he's a recruiter for African-American students. What he did was he called and he recruited me academically to come to that school and said, if you come here, we are able to give you A, B, C, and D. And so in this case, I did not sign up for a whole bunch of scholarships. I received a call from, and that's when one of the companies or universities, right, when they really want to grow and be diverse, you have to be intentional. And the University of Florida at that time was intentional with bringing in African Americans. Now, attendance was down, right? And so part of their growth, right, was one, how do we increase attendance? And there was a president at the time, I think his name was Lombardi, but he really was after trying to diversify the University of Florida. The key, I think, is while I should have looked for more scholarships, I think that's key. We'll do that with my kids for sure. In this case, I was recruited. Awesome. And I think that, as we look into what's happening today, whenever we hear companies or universities or whatever, if they really want to be successful in growing and diversifying their talent pool, you have to be focused, right? And this guy, Mr. Boatwright, was that for the University of Florida.
Was Mr. Boatwright African American?
Absolutely.
He was.
He was an African American guy.
Okay.
Right. Okay. And so he was a fantastic guy. He's no longer living. Rest in peace for him. But you can see that, look, I graduated in 1998. I still remember that guy. And he changed lives. Yeah. And so that's important.
On that same note, recently affirmative action was scrapped.
Yep.
What do you think about that?
I'm not a fan of giving away opportunities based on skin color, but I also am a believer that you have to make some wrongs right, make wrongs right. Yeah. So there's a bit of balance to that, right? Mm-hmm. And so look, I think that in the way that I just gave an example of Boatwright reaching out to African Americans, right? This scholarship was not just for African Americans, but it was called Access. He allowed me to know about this particular scholarship, which allowed me to go to the school. Mm-hmm. And so, look, I don't think that we're in a place, right? I think I've heard a couple of your podcasts, and you've given some statistics, mm-hmm. right? And it doesn't look great for us, right? Yeah. But there's a history behind that, right? There is a history of why our numbers don't look the same or on par, right, with other racial ethnicities, right? And so you have to do something with that. Now, the question is, how long do you do this, right? Look, is it 70s from here and that? Yeah. And what I tell people, again, I just said, look, my parents went to segregated school. Yeah. And so we don't have generations and generations and generations in which, right, we've been given the opportunities to try to catch up. Mm-hmm. We're still in a place where we need the help. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And so from that perspective, we still should have some level of opportunities for what African Americans have done for the country and for what has happened to them, right, from a government perspective that's led them, right, to where we are today. And so I get what some folks will say. I didn't have anything to do with that. Why should I, have to suffer and I don't get the entrance or I don't get the job because this guy that happened 20, 30, 40 years ago, it's complex. Yeah. But you know what? Life isn't fair. And I think you have to sometimes right some wrongs. And so my belief is you continue, right, to do things to support and try and improve the life of African Americans.
So you graduated with your chemistry degree, and then what next?
So I graduated with a chemistry degree with no job. I had a great time at the University of Florida, and I wasn't focused. I love to tell this story, right? I wasn't focused. I enjoyed, which I tell kids all the time. You want to go to college because there is an experience like no other, right? That you get from being on a college campus and being new to life and the new things that you learn and the people that are around and the differences and diversity of opinions and lifestyles and all the things that go with it. Unfortunately for me, right, I partied hard and I played, but I graduated, right? My last semester, because I knew this was it, I took like 20 hours one semester, 18 hours the last semester.
Buckle down.
To graduate. Okay. And so, look, I looked around. I thought that I was going to be rich because I had a chemistry degree, and I'm the only African-American Black person that I know in the whole wide world that has a chemistry degree. So I know that I'm going to be rich when I graduate. Mm. Well, here's graduation. I have no job. I got a 2.7 GPA, not so great. And I said that I would never, ever not work hard again. I'd never be in a position, put myself in a position where I didn't have options. So I go back to St. Petersburg, Florida. I'm in the newspaper and I find my first job in the newspaper as a chemist in a pharmaceutical plant not far from my home. And that's just God's blessing. And although I say I didn't work as hard as I could have, the University of Florida prepared me as a chemist. Mm. And so when I compared myself to other young chemists that were coming on, I was superior, right? And so it's amazing. Now I said, man, what if I really had put in all my effort, man? Jeez, right? That would be so great. But I took this job making $10 an hour. I matriculated out of or left that particular place and then moved to Chicago, Illinois for quite a bit, at least what I thought was a lot of money at the time, right? And I lived my whole life in Florida, wanted to try something new, and moved to Florida. And
with the same company?
Different company.
Different company.
And I think that's something that it's called risk, right? You got to take risk in life, right? And so, look, growing up 2 hours away from St. Petersburg, I remember going to school 2 hours away, University of Florida and St. Petersburg's not too far apart. I go back home afterwards. But at some point, I'm asking myself, look, who do you want to be? What do you want to do? And the city of St. Petersburg had become too small for what I had my potential to be. Mm. And again, remember I said, look, I'm never going to not have options anymore. That's right. I'm kicking butt, right? So I go to Chicago. I take a few jobs there. I hop jobs, right? I tell people, listen, don't stay at a job. It's those days of being there for 30, 40 years and loyalty is over, right? So I end up 7 years there. I don't like the cold weather. Right? My family has decided that they're not coming to visit me often because it's too cold. And I moved down back to the South in Atlanta, and here I am today. I've taken a few roles, and as I said before, now leading a global organization as Vice President of Quality Assurance.
Okay. Oh, wait. We can't just jump to Vice President just like that. I'm sure there were some stages in between there, right?
Absolutely.
But let me start with this. So you're a chemist. For people listening who may be just wondering, what there's chemistry in so many different fields, but what does a chemist do?
So a chemist, I'll tell you what I did.
Okay.
Right. But chemists do a lot of things. In the pharmaceutical industry, I test products.
Okay.
And so whether or not it's the Advil you pop, for a headache, whether or not it's HIV medication or cancer medication, right? Yeah. The ability to put compounds together, right, for it to do something internally to your body, right, is an amazing thing. That's what drugs are, right? You put these compounds together, you take them and, they change your body and hopefully for the better, right? While their side effects, that's a whole other story, but that's still a point. But my role as a chemist was to make sure that it had the proper amount of ingredients that it's supposed to have, right? And so, look, there's a difference if you're supposed to get 10 milligrams of something and it's actually 15 milligrams of something. Yeah. Well, that can be a safety issue. So chemists do a lot of things. One, that was testing. One, there's research and development. There's environmental things you can do, test the air, test the water, a lot of testing, at least from the chemical perspective. And then there's research. How do you make something? I thought actually that I was going to make hair care products, African-American hair care products when I graduated. And that was going to be something that I did. I just realized I didn't know enough chemistry at the time. But that's what a chemist does. There's so many things. Now today I don't do any chemistry. Okay. I know H2O and that's about it when it comes to chemistry. But that's growth, right? And with many times you talked about how do you jump, but let's not jump to someplace. You really start by knowing something really well, right? Which is the tactical things. And then as you grow in career, you move away from knowing the details of something to what's called leadership. Yeah. Right. And the ability to lead people to do certain things. Right. And so while I'm no longer a great chemist, I can lead chemists and I can lead others, right, to attain certain goals. Okay.
So it sounds like you kept learning along the way.
I did. The key for me was to outwork people. Right. And so like I said, I took that experience of not having options because I didn't do the things that I should do. I outwork people. And so, look, I enjoyed what I was doing at the time. Right. And so I outworked folks. I tried to learn from people. And I've got I think I do pretty well with interacting with folks. Right. And that's a big piece. Right. Look, typically, most of us have grown. We're the one and only or two only African Americans in many settings, right? Yeah, University of Florida. I'm in a class of, 1,000 people, and I may be the only African American in there. You go as a chemist, look, I may be the only African American chemist. I just said I didn't know any, right? And at the end of the day, there aren't that many. And so what I did learn, right, from the University of Florida was how to interact with white folks, multicultural folks, right, and how to do that, right, in these business settings. And to be able to talk with them, right, to be able to understand the politics, to be able to understand all the things that go around with how they became successful and weaving my way into my space, right, is a big deal. And I was able to do that and still able to do that pretty well. Right. And so I say I can be in the boardroom. Right. And I can be, in the shack where, we're playing cards and in the backyard and barbecuing. Right. With in South St. Pete. Right. I can do both. And being able to work in those areas. Right. Is a skill. Yeah. Right. And not everybody can do that really well.
So now you're a VP of an organization, a Fortune 500 organization leading, quite a few people. How many of your colleagues are African American?
So, look, I actually lead we call it D&I, and I lead the African American portion for our organization. Okay. As I said before, if you want to have African Americans, you have to be intentional. And so the thing is, you have to work and be at the table, right? For one, to be able to look, what are our demographics of this company? Who do we want to be? And I say it, look, we're in the Atlanta area today. There's not a reason. There cannot be a reason why we can't be overrepresented as African Americans in Atlanta, right? And so it is a constant. You have to be able to constantly make sure that it's visible, right? How many do we have? Who are they, right? So that you can do that. The second part is you have to be intentional in hiring, right? And so for me, I don't mind scraping through resumes to find an African American to do a role, or to at least be a part of the interview process. And so what happens is, if you want to have an organization that's represented appropriately, you have to go and do certain things. Look, we talked about Boatwright. He's a recruiter. I recruit for my organization. And so if you're not recruiting, then you can't expect to have good numbers. People hire people that they like. And so I think that's one thing that people have to understand when you're going for a job. If you get to an interview, it's most likely because you're already technically, we've passed the mark that you can technically do it. The part that people care about is, can I work with you? And do I like you? And that, and people sometimes don't get that. Like, it's only supposed to be about, am I qualified or not? No, right? People want to have people around they trust. And in many cases, as African Americans, because we don't have access to other folks that have been in the field, right, and things like that, we get pushed to the sideline, or we're not given opportunities. And so one of the things that I preach to African American leaders, right, whether it's, a business or others, is I had a guy that said, if not me, then who? If it's not me that hires African Americans, then who? And so we have to take that mindset, especially as we get to places where we can hire and fire, that we take that mindset, if not me, then who? And so I'm very intentional about finding good talent that can be African American.
So just in a nutshell, if you don't mind speaking to, there are many different people listening to the show, but when it comes to the interview process, especially in your field, we had a scientist on in one of the previous episodes. It sounds like you're picking people in similar field, the chemists and stuff.
Yes.
So obviously, like you said, they pass the technical aspect if they're at the interview.
That's right.
And you're looking for them to, do I like you? How do you show someone you're likable in 20 minutes?
No, that's important. So one, like as I said, we'll get through the technical questions, right? Most likely I can check the boxes that you got there.
Yeah.
But there's more than just the technical pieces to making something happen, right? I mean, look, at the end of the day, we make products to help people.
Yeah.
But they're behind the scenes that we make those products to make money, right? In order to do that, you have to work with people. So how do you collaborate? How do you lead, right? When you have conflict, I'll ask a question, right? Look, tell me about a time, right, that you disagree with your boss. Tell me about that time and tell me how you solve that. So I want to understand how you manage conflict. Yeah. I want to understand how you lead people, right? Look, tell me about a time maybe when you're running a project and somebody's not performing. How do you deal with that? And so as you start to grow past, if you want to be in leadership roles, then it's how you deal with those type of situations, because you can be the smartest, right, and still not perform, right? And so it's another saying I always say, you can be right and still be wrong because your timing is off, right? And so, when we say liking, it's the ability to, how are you going to interact in situations, right, when there's a problem? How are you going to drive and motivate people, right? So those things count, right? And I want to know that, if you're going to work for me, right, that you're going to be able to solve problems.
That's all we have time for on the show today. Make sure you join us next week for the conclusion of our interview with Daniel. He's got a lot more amazing things to share with us, and you surely don't want to miss it. My name is Toxio Gunyemi. God bless you, and I'll see you next time.